And it is so lovely to be with everyone on the peninsula. And thank you so much, Jackie, for your lovely introduction. In fact, I was supposed to be with you at the moment, but as we know, the borders are closed and the quarantining, the locking down, everything is continuing. So it wasn't possible for me to come, but wherever I meet people, whenever I meet, I always just love to ask, I hope everyone is okay. I hope you're managing. And I really feel that all we have learned over these years about spirituality and really being self-sufficient and self-sustaining, it's a perfect time for us to really practice everything we've been learning and studying for so many years. But really our spirituality is sustaining us because everything in our world is so incredibly uncertain at the moment. So I think it's challenging on one level, but on another level, it's almost taking us closer to our truth and deeper meaning and purpose in life, to really know the self and have that beautiful relationship with God. Now, what I want to do tonight is really tell you the story of the Brahma Kumaris. And that story is really so totally interwoven with the story of someone sitting behind me here, which is Brahma Baba, who was the founder, or we perhaps prefer to call the instrument of the Brahma Kumaris. And because it's quite a story which I'm going to share with you, I've actually got a few notes. So if you wonder what I'm looking at, I'm just looking at a few notes so that I can take you through the story of this organization and how it began. Jackie was telling you a little bit about my story, and in fact, I think, as I may have mentioned, I grew up in Melbourne. And when I was just 20, I was at Melbourne University. I was studying architecture. There was an incredible feeling in me that this world was changing. I just couldn't see the world continuing like it was. And you know, your logical mind tells you one thing, but your intuitive mind tells you something else. So I deferred my studies and I wandered the world for a few years, and I settled in London, and I came across the Brahma Kumaris in London. And I did the meditation course, which all of you have done. And when I saw the photo of Brahma Baba, I thought, what a beautiful face, what a kind face, what a warm and loving and welcoming face. But to be frank, I had a resistance to gurus. I just had this deep feeling of discomfort around gurus. And I remember asking Sister Genti, who I think many of you know, who's the director of all our European centers. I said, can you tell me a bit more about him? And she really told me so beautifully how really, in fact, how incredibly humble he was. How he felt really he was just an instrument of God. He never ever said, I am God. He never liked anyone to worship him. He never liked photos taken of him. We have photos around because he would always point to the Supreme. And that was really like the story of his life. And just a little bit about his history. He was born in a part of India around the mid-1870s. In a place called Sindh, which is sort of the southern part now of Pakistan. Now, this was before India and Pakistan were divided, what they call partition. And he just had a very humble upbringing. His father was a school teacher and probably very, very deeply religious, like I would say the majority of people in the subcontinent are. When he left school, he became a jeweler. and he was really quite successful. And this came home to me once when I was in Calcutta. And I visited Calcutta, I think around 1980. And there was a huge Brahma Kumaris function. Calcutta is an extraordinary city. It has the population of Australia in Calcutta. That just shows you how extraordinary that city is. Actually, I love Calcutta. I find it a wonderful place. It has a central park, a beautiful park called the Queen Victoria Memorial, where because of, you know, the British Raj, Queen Victoria, and her statue is there. But in the old part of Calcutta, Brahma Baba, he used to be called Dada Lake Raj. Dada is like a term of respect. He had a shop in a market and his jewelry shop. And he was a very successful jeweler. And I think if you know the history of India, there was over 600 Maharajas who are like kings, you can say. And they were incredibly wealthy people. You know, in the 1940s, 50s, of the 10 richest people in the world, 5 of them were Maharajas of India, because the people in the state that they were the king of would pay taxes directly into their account. But their role was really the old style of a benevolent leader who would look after all the people in the kingdom, build the roads, etc., etc. So he was really a part of that time, you know, British Raj India at the time, and he was working as a jeweler. And you could say that he was a devout spiritual seeker, but also a devout family man and father. He had 5 children. And like most in India in those days, had an arranged marriage and had then had his 5 children. And he would live really between, you know, Sindh, which is on the western side of India, and Calcutta on the eastern side of India. But the way they would get across is trains, these incredible Indian Rail. I don't know whether you know, but Indian Rail is the largest single employee in the world. It employs 4 million people, about the population of Melbourne works for Indian Rail, just to give you a bit of an idea of the immensity of India and the extraordinary nature of the country. Now, for men in India, there's often a term called Wanprast, and it's sort of like a time of retirement where you go deep into your spiritual practice. It was often at that time that men would adopt a guru and prepare for their death. In other words, really go deep into their spirituality. And in the Vedas, which are the traditional scriptures, or one of them of India, they talk about 4 phases of a man's life. A child, firstly, a student. And a student life, you would remain celibate, you wouldn't get married, hence even in the Western countries why you were a bachelor of. The 3rd phase of life was the family, having the family growing up. And then the 4th phase was this phase where you would prepare, you know, to meet God. And so Brahma Baba was around that time in his life. He'd had his family, had this successful business. And actually he was quite disillusioned in a way with religion, even though he was so devout, because he had experiences. He had many gurus, as many did, and he saw them wasting money and even gambling and things like this. And he once went up to a place called Amarnath, which is up in Kashmir, which is the northwest of India, right up in the Himalayas. And there's a famous Shiva temple. In India, there are 12 famous Shiva temples, and the number 1 devotees would visit those 12 Shiva temples in their lives. And, you know, the traditional belief is that the Shiva lingam, the image which they worship there, which they believe is a form of God, was ice. was permanently ice, and they believed that was the wonder or magic of God. But he went up, and one morning he went very early to pray in this temple, and he saw the priest packing up the ice. So he realized that wasn't true. And he had an experience that so many of the temples were so noisy and so dirty. And so, like many of us, perhaps there's a yearning for truth, and yet you can see there's a lot of corruption and manipulation in religion. I think many of us have had that feeling on our journey. He absolutely loved the Gita, which is the oldest scripture in the world. And whenever he would travel on the trains, he would carry this little Gita and write in it. He also studied the Granth, which is the scripture of the Sikhs who wear the turbans, a beautiful scripture too. He read the Bible, he read the Quran. He was really well versed in all the religions. And you could imagine that that time of India, the 1930s, was really the time of Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi was huge in India, or growing huge. The British Raj was there. You know, no country likes to be occupied by another country. But Gandhi sort of organized passive resistance to the British. And he would have meetings, and sometimes tens, hundreds of thousands of people would gather at these meetings. And, you know, a political meeting in Australia, they will, you know, talk about policies and that. You know, Gandhi used to get them to chant Patit Pawan Sitaram, which means, "Oh, purifier, come." They would call on God to come and help them. So you get a sort of a flavor of Brahma Baba, the time in history. And in the middle of this, just out of the blue, he went to Benares to pray. He was really being pulled. It was his time of retirement, preparing for to go much deeper into his spiritual practice. He had a vision. And the vision was just a catastrophic upheaval of the world. It was so vivid, and he saw a world being absolutely destroyed. He saw war, unbelievable war, nuclear war. He saw natural calamities, massive upheaval in the planet. And quite frankly, he was so shocked. It sort of shocked him. And for a few days, he went into this deep sort of reflective silence. He just had no context. Where on earth did this vision come from? And then a few days later, another vision. And this was like the opposite. It was like this extraordinary scene where he saw these beautiful stars coming out of the sky and just landing right in the center of the forehead. They were like souls of these like divine human beings, these beautiful human beings. And they were sort of these radiant, loving, powerful beings, and just the embodiment of peace and happiness. And just as the first vision just filled him with so much sort of shock in a way, the second vision just filled him with so much happiness and joy. But still the context, he wasn't sure. Then he had a third vision of Vishnu. Now, Vishnu is a four-armed figure you've seen in India, the four arms. And I think for those who are perhaps not from a Hindu background, it looks pretty weird, looks a bit strange. But actually the symbolism is absolutely beautiful. It's the vision of, you know, man and woman together, the perfection in, you could say, relationship or harmony or marriage or whatever you say. And he just heard a voice, "You are this, you are this, you are this." And he just, all these visions just made him really think very deeply, you know, what's going on. And he had a dramatic change because he realized that this was a message. And so he lost interest in his gurus, worshipping, even his business, his huge business. He basically gave to his business partner. He just lost interest in material things and limited things. And he would sit in meditation constantly. And when others began to come in front of him, they would see light, they would have visions. And they just had this incredible feeling of these vibrations of love, of purity, and of spiritual power. And he felt, Brahma Baba felt some other power come into him. And what we understand is at that time, another soul actually entered him and started to work through him. It wasn't him. He was an elevated soul. He was a spiritual person. He was a moral and ethical person. But this soul that came in him, we understand as Shiva. We call him Shiv Baba, the supreme soul. A soul that doesn't take birth and rebirth like you or me or even him. A soul that remains eternally pure. A soul that's never influenced or affected. And it's like Brahma, and Brahma in, the sort of the Western context means Adam, became like an instrument for Shiv Baba to begin to teach through. So when the BKs see him, we don't worship him, we don't venerate him, we highly regard him, but actually we're listening to the soul who entered him, Shiv Baba. And he was the one who really began to teach. And all of this began in about 1936, 1937, over a few years. And it even took him a little bit of time to work out really what was going on. But instantly, Shiv Baba, through Brahma Baba, began to say that you are souls, but you've forgotten who you are. You've now become completely body conscious. All human beings have forgotten they're an eternal soul, have started to take on the temporary identity of the body. And when body consciousness is the seed of my thinking, all my thinking, my decision-making, my emotions are impregnated with ego and attachment and fear and a lot of negativity. So the seed of negativity is really a loss of the awareness of ourself. And hence, he absolutely began to teach, and this small community formed around him. He began to teach that to practice once again to become soul conscious. And even he was married. He began to look at his wife as a soul. He began to look at his children as the soul, of course, giving them love and respect. But, rather than my wife, my children, he sort of realized that in the term scheme of eternity, these are temporary relationships, and the permanent relationship is the one with the divine. And so he would see everyone as a soul. And he began to teach that, the one relationship that is permanent is the relationship with the Supreme Soul, with God. And God, he taught, is a point like a human soul. Incredible. God is just a point, has no physical size. And in fact, when you really think of it, a point is changeless. God is changeless. God is the one entity that never changes. We change, everything's changing every second in this world, but God remains changeless. And he began to teach Shiv Baba through Brahma Baba to have all relationships with him, the Supreme Soul. And this is also almost the healing method, that when I have all relationships with the one who's the Supreme, the Soul, non-physical, egoless, what do I become? I begin to heal deeply inside. So the natural methodology that was taught is to fall in love with the Supreme. When I fall in love, I begin to remember. The more I remember, I begin to transform. And the more I transform, everything changes within me, and I begin to start to have a whole new perspective about myself, my life, my relationships. and what's happening in the world. And so then also Shiv Baba began to say that time moves in a cycle. And he said is that when he comes, it's the beginning of a new cycle. And then he said he would come and teach for so many years. And what he called that period is the confluence age, the confluence from an old world, which is known as the Iron Age, and the new world, which is known as the Golden Age, that he would teach for a period of time. And when the upheaval in the world, like a massive upheaval, a destruction happens, that's when the new world begins. So when Shiv Baba comes into Brahma, a new cycle begins. When a destruction happens, the new world begins. And then when the deities start to live, the beings of the Golden Age, that's when the Golden Age really starts. So he said we're in this incredible transition time, and the advent of the Supreme Soul indicates this extraordinary time of transition. And so what even Baba said was that he would come, he would teach, and so many would come and do the courses, people of all backgrounds, from all religions. They would recognize that they're a soul, start to practice. And when there was a number who was soul conscious, that was like the seed or the foundation to begin like a new society, a new world, or the Golden Age. Now, I think, as you could imagine, that all this knowledge was pretty radical, and there was huge effect on the community he was living in. And, you know, just to set the scene, you know, India in the 1930s was very poor in those days, very religious, very devotional, maybe almost superstitious, and very traditional, and I'd say quite conservative in many ways. And one of those ways was the attitude to women. And it wasn't uncommon that girls were often betrothed around birth to another family, a boy in another family, and even married when they reached puberty. You know, Mahatma Gandhi was living with his wife when he was 13, I think, living with his wife when he was 13. Now that was the culture, that was the way it was in those days. But they were married, and really she would just raise children and stay at home. Very few would be educated and really could not do anything without the permission of her husband or her husband's family. So very much a life which, you know, she had to really bow down to her husband and the authorities in her life. And then Brahma Baba, right from the beginning, Shiv Baba, we can say, and Brahma Baba gave the responsibility of the Brahma Kumaris to women. And quite frankly, if you sort of take yourself into the culture at that time, it was absolutely radical and revolutionary. And really, you know, women were very much second class. And because of doing this, and because a lot of the original membership were women, there was a lot of opposition to what was happening. There were demonstrations, there was court cases. I could spend a lot of time telling you quite extraordinary scenes, because there were married women and young women as well, and even children. And so many stories that the families were scared that their daughters would go there, because sort of a dishonor that the daughter may decide she didn't want to get married. But Brahma Baba created a trust of 12 mothers, and he actually surrendered his wealth to the mothers. And there was a real act of sort of, you know, surrender. You know, he was really acting on what he was talking about. And that's how he founded the Brahma Kumaris. And when you really think that That was like in the 1930s, 12 mothers began. And now in India, there are 35,000 teaching centers just in India and a few thousand outside India. There are 25,000 fully surrendered sisters in India. So the sisters in their white saris running the centers. So it's been absolutely, in a way, a revolution. And as you could imagine, initially, it wasn't accepted by mainstream society because girls were just married off. And when they wanted to actually live their own life and become spiritual teachers, which was really the domain of men, the male gurus, then, you know, you can understand. We all know, whether it's in Australia or anywhere, when people do something different from what is traditional, there's some upheaval. And it really came home to me once, maybe 15 years ago. I was in a place called Surat, which is in Gujarat on the coast of Western India. And in a beautiful Jain temple, you know, the Jains are a big religion in India. There was a meeting of all of India's religious leaders with the president of India, Abdul Kalam at the time. And I went along with two of their sisters. And we were representing the Brahma Kumaris. And it was a real eye-opener for me. There was 25 or 30 of the religious leaders of India, which is the country of religion. There was one woman in the circle, and that was the Brahma Kumari. We were sitting behind. Each organization had one representative. And it really came home to me how radical it was to set up the Brahma Kumaris in this way and start to put the women in front. And yet I could see also the incredible respect the Brahma Kumaris have now in India, because the way the women work in a very trustworthy, simple and honest way has brought a lot of regard for them. So a community was created, and actually for 14 years they lived in Karachi, which is now in Pakistan. In those days was a part of India. And I went there 2 years ago. I spent some time in Pakistan, and I went to the house where they lived, an amazing old house. You know, a sort of a classic colonial house. So you could imagine the size. 200 people slept in this house. Now, a lot of the sisters, there were 200 sisters actually, only women were sleeping there. And they had dormitory style accommodation. Beautiful. And the atmosphere in the house was something I really found quite extraordinary. And so what they did is that they really had like a whole spiritual practice. And they had a little school. They had a house next door for all the women with small children. They called it Baby Bhavan. And so they would study spirituality, and all this, also the children went to school, of course, to learn the ABC. But what they were taught right from the young age, these girls were taught to forget the consciousness of the body and become aware that you're an eternal soul. And to forget the consciousness of the body, Baba would teach the girls to fix cars and do building, even the boys to cook, and so that they sort of got out of the assigned gender roles, and they became more aware that I'm actually a soul and I need the qualities of male and female in me. And in a way, that symbol of Vishnu, the four-armed, really means that we need to develop in us spiritually the power of action, which is symbolized by the male energy, and the power of virtue, which is symbolized by the female energy. And they began to wear white. So you've seen us all wear white. And really that came away in a very practical, that started in a very practical way, because, you know, they moved in there and like everyone, they were just in clothes. And sometimes fashion pulls the intellect. And they just decided to all have white and be absolutely simple. Spirituality is simple. They didn't live a life of hardly anything good to eat. They ate well. They were comfortable, but they still were living with great simplicity. And, you know, when I went to this place, what I could feel, this incredible building, was the extraordinary love. I just felt that, you know, my experience is really the Supreme Soul is the ocean of love, an unlimited love, a sort of a purity of love I believe we all really yearn for, a love which fully accepts you, a love that gives you a sense of belonging, and a love that gives you your self-respect back. And he just filled them with this love. And it's this love which began this deep healing, this deep spiritual transformation. Until this day, that's the method in meditation, to absolutely feel the deep love penetrating the core of your being. And that's what begins to shift all the old stuff, all the impurity and the negativity we've collected. And to do this, he got them to start a timetable, and they would wake up early in the morning before 4 o'clock. Sometimes Brahma himself, many times he'd wake up around 2 in the morning, and he'd just be sitting. Because even though Shiv Baba was pure, Brahma had to make his own effort. He was a student like you or me. He was still studying. He never said he was pure. He always said that I'm an effort maker like all of you. And then in the morning, they began, after their early morning meditation, they'd all take a bath. And then they'd come and sit and meditate and have a discourse. So Shiv Baba began to speak through Brahma knowledge, which we call the muli. The muli means the flute. It's like the flute of knowledge. And each morning they would study. And the basis of what you learn in the meditation course about the soul, about the Supreme Soul, about the cycle of time, the tree, was all revealed by the Supreme Soul Shiva through Brahma at that time. But also they had a lot of fun. So there was a deep spiritual atmosphere. And really I found when I first started that they would really know how to have fun, but fun that has humor that is at no one's expense. It's not about anyone, but it's just light and lovely. And so the more we become soul conscious, we are naturally happy, and we tend to see virtue in each other. And that creates this wonderful, positive, uplifting, self-transforming atmosphere. And that was really the atmosphere of the organization. My experience is it's really been built on love. These original days were just such an atmosphere of love that people were willing to let go their old stuff, their old memories, their old hurts, their old unhappinesses, and step into who they really could be. And so Brahma Baba really was the embodiment of that love too. Shiv Baba the ocean, but he absorbed it in himself. And everyone who met him just met him so uplifted by his love and his extraordinary love for God. And it was on the basis of his love for the Supreme Soul, his love for God, that he gave love and respect to absolutely everyone who met him. I remember one person telling me that he'd been a philosopher, a professor of philosophy, living in Bombay, and his mother had started to attend the Brahma Kumaris, and he didn't really feel that, didn't understand the knowledge or believe it. And so he went up to Mount Abu and he stayed there, and he argued with Brahma Baba a lot. And when he was leaving, Brahma Baba was standing at the gate saying goodbye. And he said, Brahma had tears of love in his eyes. And he thought, I argued with him, I didn't show him any respect, and he still was showing me this love. And actually, that's what shifted him to become a practitioner himself. Not only that, he was so humble. He never accepted praise for himself. He remained absolutely simple. He did some of the jobs around the ashram like everybody else. And he would always put others in front, especially the sisters. He would always give them that regard. And he always said that the change in the world would happen through women, through the sisters. And he set up all the centers with all the sisters running the centers. Even If people opposed him or defamed him, he showed them love. He never showed revenge or reaction in any way. And he was the embodiment of truth too, and incredibly honest. And he would say, unless you're honest, you can't really heal. You have to be honest with yourself. Because he realized that religion, a lot of our religious practices, we had formed a lot of self-deception, denial, self-denial. These sort of pretending not to see my weakness. And he really encouraged, to go beyond that. So as you can see, this whole atmosphere, was really a wonderful atmosphere. And this was still in Karachi between 1936 till about the late 1940s, until there was massive upheaval in India. And as you may have heard, about partition, Gandhi was on the rise. There was the British left in 1947. And there was all the upheaval that began between Hindus and Muslims. Now, there's many opinions about this. I often said about the British, there was divide and rule. But anyway, there was unfortunately huge fighting. Some say up to 2 million died in that fighting in incredibly vicious ways. Muslims killing Hindus, Hindus killing Muslims. And, over a few years, it was incredibly dangerous. And Brahma Baba and the BKs were in the Muslim part, which is going to become Pakistan. So in the end, they went and they took a boat from Karachi to India, and they caught a train. So they'd been living in this wonderful big place, and they actually moved to Mount Abu, which is now still the headquarters of the Brahma Kumaris. Now, Mount Abu is very remote, really. It's a remote place in Rajasthan, which is, one of the states beside Gujarat and Western India. Raja means king. It's like the land of kings. There were many kings. And up in Mount Abu, many of the Maharajas had summer palaces because it was so hot in that part of the world. In summer, they would go up. Until this day in Mount Abu, the elephant tracks that the Maharajas would take their whole households, they would take a whole, line of elephants, and this still there till this day, this elephant track up to the top of the mountain. They would live there during the heat of the summer months. And so they settled there in the most incredibly simple place. It was just really walls and a roof and nothing much more. So they'd gone from really quite a comfortable life. And this is a period where, a very simple period of the organization. And even when I first went in 1975, it was still very simple, just a few buildings, only about 30 or 40 residents there. But the spiritual atmosphere was absolutely extraordinary. It was a palpable energy and feeling of so much love, so much lightness, so much pure feeling, just radiated. And this was really the foundation of him and his deep meditation. And of course, the Supreme Soul teaching through him. And this was the time in the early 1950s. They moved to Mount Abu, they relocated in Mount Abu, and then they started centers around India. Just a few, and really, I remember Daddy Janki, and many of you have met Daddy Janki. She only died in March last year, 2020, at the age of 104. And she told us that she started a center in Pune, which is a lovely city sort of east of Mumbai. And when she started, she had one room, a little room, and she would sleep there, she would take her bath there, she would cook there, and she would teach in the same room. This is how simple the organization was in the 50s. When I got there, even in 1975, it was still so simple, one car. But as I said, it was so spiritually powerful. Now the growth is extraordinary. There's a center, there's, as I said, 36,000 teaching places in India these days in the last audit. Now, some of them are just a room in a house, but some of them are huge centers in the various states of India. And so they began to move all around India. And this was a time of huge expansion. Many centers opened. And what they loved to do was to come to Mount Abu and meet Shiv Baba and Brahma Baba, the Supreme Soul, through the medium of Brahma. And they would meet Baba and develop their own relationship and start to have their own connection with Shiv Baba as the light, the Supreme Being. And that went on right until the 18th of January, 1969. And this is why January is a special month. And this is why I'm sharing this, because January we often call the month of remembrance, the month of love, the month of power. And it's not that we worship him. It's not that we venerate him. We learn by his example because we also want to transform. Because one evening, he took the evening class. There's a beautiful little hall in Mount Abu where he used to teach. There's now a hall down below that takes 30,000 people, but this hall would probably only take 100 people. He came into this hall, he spoke his versions, he went to the door and waved to he used to call everyone child, child. He walked to his room and Daddy Prakashmani, Daddy means older sister, she followed him and was holding his hand. He lay down on his bed. He was in his early 90s and she could feel the energy leaving his body and the soul left the body. And they thought that Brahma Baba would be with them for a much longer. And so that was a bit of a surprise to all of them. And they had a system where some of the sisters would go in trance and they would be able to go to what we call the subtle world. It's like a world beyond the material world where they could meet Shiv Baba and get messages. So they tried to go there and they couldn't even. Till the 21st of January, one of the sisters, Dadi Gulzar, she was the main trance messenger. She went into trance and then the souls of Shiva and Brahma together came in her. And they continued, they began a new teaching, which we call the Bap Dada, the father and the elder brother. Together, they took over and began to continue the teaching. And when I went in 1975, I would sit in front of the two of them and they would meet everyone personally and teach as well. And nowadays, up until 2 years ago, they were coming and the numbers grew and grew and grew and grew until they had to cap it, 30, 40,000 people would come every time, sit in one huge hall and Baba would speak. But that's now stopped. And so Baba always said at some point it would stop. Baba always said that, there'd be a time he'd come and teach. The souls, the old souls would come, recognize Baba and realize I now have to become soul conscious. I have to let go of my body consciousness. But Baba always said there would be like a huge upheaval in the world. Not really something that we don't consider sort of to be afraid of. No one likes it, but it's just change because the soul's eternal and immortal, every human soul. The more we're body conscious, the more we fear it because we fear death and we fear loss. But this whole life in a way is conquering death and conquering loss and realizing, we're on this amazing journey and that really what was taught was to prepare myself for the golden age. There will be a massive upheaval in the world. And I think many of us are starting to see the really obvious signs almost day by day of what is happening around us in the world. We're not wanting it to happen. We're not willing it to happen. What we focus on is the golden age, not so much the end or the downfall of the iron age. So that's why Baba called it a confluence of an old culture based on body consciousness and ego and anger and war and fighting. And as many people create soul consciousness, it's a culture based on love, purity, respect. And that's really what we're preparing for the coming world or the golden age. And so Baba now, Brahma Baba, we see him as an angel. When he left his body, it's like he conquered his weakness, he conquered matter, both of them. And the last three words he gave to us were really, when he came back, his final sort of essence of his study was incorporeal, egoless, and viceless. When I, the soul, realize I'm non-physical and experience myself to be egoless and pure, viceless, that's the healing complete. And I often feel that incorporeal, when I realize my non-physical self, it heals my relationship with the material world, with my body in the material world. When I become egoless, that is what heals my relationship with my family and all souls. And when I become viceless, that heals my relationship with God. When I become viceless, I feel God's presence. It's real. It's not just a belief. I'm not worshiping. I'm actually having a natural, loving relationship with the Supreme Soul. I, the bodiless soul, remember the Supreme Soul. And so nowadays, in the last 2 years, the meetings have stopped. Daddy Guzar, who is the medium, is elderly now. Now, Baba can enter anyone, but Baba's really said all the knowledge is there. You know the knowledge. Now, Baba's really encouraging us to practice daily, set up a structure in my day so that I'm able to really practice and become a pure soul once more. Prepare myself, because soon all the souls will fly home and will start to come back into the golden age, just like Brahma Baba's vision, the pure souls coming into the deity bodies once more. Now, I've been going on for quite a long time, and you've probably got dozens of questions, I don't know. So Jackie, I'm just wondering if people can unmute and just ask me, or whether you'll speak them to me, or maybe you don't want to ask any questions. I'm not sure. So I've just with an open heart shared the story of our understanding of Brahma Baba.
Well, Charlie, it's been an amazing journey that you have told us in the last 45 minutes. So. And something that you've been experienced for over 40 years. So there must be questions that would be on people's minds. But definitely, I think you could feel that this experience was genuine and so real that Charlie was telling you about the simplicity of this life, and yet the absolutely unusual, unknown detail of the things that go on. And the spiritual power, how you recognize it. So please be open with your questions. Can you write them in the chat? That would make it easier for us, but if you wish to speak them, you can do that too. Is that a stunned silence or a contemplative silence?
It probably is a stunned silence. So if anyone would, really feel open, because probably I've, brought up things and maybe you're not sure, or even if there's something you really don't agree with, that's fine, you know, because really, I think these are all offered with a full heart. We're all different, we're all unique, and we fully respect that. Absolutely respect. But I just thought to share the full story of our understanding of where these teachings really come from.
Mhm. Thanks, Charlie. Soul consciousness, when you talk about soul consciousness, and I think you mentioned there to give ourselves back to ourselves. This is a very kind of puzzling comment, but when you see the devotion, and you talked a lot about the devotion of India too, the difference between devotion and how we were, the attitude we had then towards ourselves, and the attitude which Baba is encouraging in us or teaching us to adopt in a soul conscious way about ourselves. There's a significant difference.
There really is, Jackie. And, you know, this came home to me so deeply because, in a way, I think, you know, one of the things I found with Brahma Baba, his absolute regard for all traditions and all belief systems. But religion is like a practice where often it says, become pure and you can know God. Whereas spirituality is know God and that will make you pure. It's like a different way. And if you really think of religion, whether it's really in India or anywhere in the world, we prostrate ourselves in front of some higher being, whether we believe it God, a prophet, a saint. And when you really look at that, it's like, oh God, you're so great, you're so pure, and I'm so low, I'm so impure. And as we understand, when you do that for life after life, year after year, there's a profoundly deep sense of unworthiness, inadequacy, inferiority. And I would say this is the biggest obstacle in the spiritual journey. And yet, the whole of what was taught is to restore my self-value. And when I'm body conscious, I can't really do it because body consciousness means I'm dominated by my ego and lack of self-respect. That's really what body consciousness is. That distorts every view of myself, every impression. But when I'm soul conscious, when I really start to live as a soul, my own experience is your sense of self-value, step by step, is rebuilt until you're not dancing to the tune of the external world. You know, whatever the world thinks of you, you have your own self-value and you live in your self-value. And in a way, Brahma Baba didn't want us to venerate, praise, worship him. He wanted us to step back into our own praise, so to speak, our own greatness, our original state. And he described it that the soul was pure, totally pure. And as it came around the cycle, it kept losing purity. And as I began to identify with being a body, I became really, shall we say, grossly impure. I'm more dominated by my negativity. And then, but the blueprint of purity is still within me. So when I realize that the soul conscious me is still within me, that's what this life is about, reawakening. And really, I think it's like the story of the Sleeping Beauty that, you know, actually it's a myth. It's a myth about this, that we have all the beauty inside us, but we're asleep. And the handsome prince is really God who comes and opens the awareness of who I really am and restores my self-respect once again. And that's why really we would say we're at the end of a world dominated by religion, and the golden age, there's no religion. We're just being pure. We're just living as we are. We're not worshiping, we're not seeking. We are the embodiment at that time. So that's where this is a massive transformation at this time.
I like the point of your, that it was a transition. And earlier on, we were listening to the contemplation by Anthony Strano and his, such an emphasis on peace. And the world seeks peace too. And yet it's not happening. And is it like we become in line with God's intention for a peaceful world, become in line with it when we start to emphasize the peace of the soul?
I think so, because, you know, when we change, the world changes. It's that fundamental, how can we have a peaceful world unless I know and experience peace in myself? That was such a dramatic realization. I was like a peace activist in the late 60s and 70s, you know, when Australia was against, or in Vietnam, etc. And I realized during that, you know, you can't fight for peace. It's a contradiction in terms, you know. You actually have to know and taste peace. And when we actually become peaceful, the world will change. And you know what Baba has said about the golden age, that he says there's sort of one people, there's total unity. And you know, now in the world, 7.8 billion human beings, 195 countries, 6,500 spoken languages, 4,500 religions, you know, as we grow ego, divide, further divide, till a lot of us feel almost in every family there's division. I'm right and you're wrong. I like you, I hate you. It's just such a divided world. And maybe some feel it's always been like this, but according to Baba, it wasn't. It was a unified world, and it will return because time moves in a cycle. And even the indigenous people of Australia believe that. All the old cultures of the world understood time moves in a cycle.
Yeah.
Mm.
There is a question. When you were talking about the incorporeal, egoless, and viceless, with the sort of summing up of Brahma's life. But there's a question, are there any healers who work through Baba? You explained.
You know, what we understand is that Shiv Baba, who the teachings are his teachings, and it's not Brahma Baba. So Baba, you could say, is the great healer, and heals us of our past karmic story and all that sort of thing. So Brahma Baba was an instrument. Now, he was an effort maker too. So Shiv Baba was the teacher, Brahma was a student. He listened and he practiced too. But the wonder was that Shiv Baba came and sat in the forehead and spoke through him. Now, our understanding in the BKs is that even with Christ, there was, you know, the carpenter in Nazareth, Jesus of Nazareth. He was a simple man, obviously a good person. He went into the desert for 40 days and 40 nights. And that's when, you know, the Christ really only spoke for 3 years. We understand the Christ soul came in him and taught at that time. And then the Christ soul also took birth and rebirth. Just like Shiva came into the body of Brahma and used him as an instrument to teach. If you even know the story of Buddha, that Buddha, Siddhartha was a king and a kingdom in the south of Nepal, and Buddha used him as an instrument to a similar story to Christ. He went into the jungles. That's when the pure soul, the Christ soul, the Buddha soul came and began to teach and establish that religion. So I don't know whether all this seems a bit overwhelming, but just to give it context, our understanding, you know, is that really our time now, we consider Shiv Baba pure, eternally pure. More I remember Shiv Baba, have connection, I also re-emerge my purity and self-respect.
Thanks, Charlie. And there is a question here on your input into someone who found the Murlis difficult to understand, who had listened to the Murlis, but finding them difficult to understand. Could you share your inputs on this?
Yes, I think that's really common, because I think they can sort of press buttons, but I would absolutely continue, because, you know, the teacher is soul conscious. And to listen to the Maulis, I need to be soul conscious. If I'm body conscious, it's not so easy. And I'll tell you my experience that when I started, I used to write them down because there was no English Maulis at the time. And I used to write them down in full. And then I used to read it quite a few times during the day. And I found the first reading, it was nice. The second reading, I started to see all the connections, because you find the Maulis move from point to point. The third reading, I started to see the deeper themes. The fourth reading, I felt it making me soul conscious. And by the fifth reading, it was like an experience. And the sixth reading was like meditation. And I began to realize that really the knowledge, if we just take it in a head level, that's how we learn today. It has to be transformed into an experience. And when I really sort of transform the knowledge of the eternal soul, the point, I can know a quality of peace that can never be broken. And when I transform the knowledge of the Supreme Soul and the connection, I will know a quality of love and belonging and security that can never be broken. So it just needs a little bit of perseverance and trying to go a little bit deeper. And if some of the language puts you off, because sometimes, you know, some of us have had backgrounds in church and stuff, and some of the words press buttons, it's all very normal. But really, I feel what the time is saying to us is to put a daily practice, have a daily practice. And a part of that is to meditate and study the Mauli. And once you get into a rhythm, you feel you're growing, you feel you're on the path, you're on the journey towards soul consciousness. But in saying that, we are the deepest realizes that we're all unique, we're all good, everyone has their own role and their own part, and we respect that. But if you want to try it even for a period, you know, it's really worthwhile to try and explore it for myself.
And then there's the question, the $60 million question. What do you believe will happen at the change, and when will it happen?
Well, I've got my crystal ball. Can you see my crystal ball? I would love to give you, you know, Baba said in 1930s, it would be 100 years. 100 years really where he would come, he would teach the souls who would come and recognize and practice would come. And there would be a massive upheaval and a bit of a period, and then the golden age would start. That was 100 years. Well, it's been over 80 years already. And, you know I can fully understand some people feel it's a negative thing. I don't think it's a negative thing. It's sort of that we're just looking at reality, that everything changes in time. A tree is a little sapling, it grows huge, it dies, but another sapling comes. It's the same with everything in this material world. And we're watching the forces of body consciousness in an extreme, becoming more extreme almost daily. So we can't give you a date, but all I would say is to use the time in a worthwhile way to prepare myself. And I often think, is my vision on the old and the fear of change and loss, or is my vision on creating something new? Because there's two energies, you know, we're meeting together. And even though we see such a destructive atmosphere in the world, there's so many people like us all over the world sitting in silence, transforming themselves for a new world, a new age. So many people believe it, that some massive transformation is coming. And I really feel the main thing is to really live a simple life, a pure life, and really explore your relationship with the Supreme Soul, the divine, with Baba. And really, you know, as I say time and time again, it's worked for me, it's worked for Jackie, it's worked for many of us, but each one of us is unique, and we fully, fully, fully regard that. But I think it's worth giving it a real chance just to see whether it's going to help me manage these times and become soul conscious.
Thank you, Charlie. And would you be prepared to just lead us in a contemplation, or what we call a meditation, just to finish off the session? Thank you, everyone, for being here and staying with us. And thank you for the questions. And if you have any more, we're always here to have a chat with you.
So, Jackie, were you meaning some sort of commentary?
Please, yes, that would be lovely. Then us to close. So I'm saying Om Shanti to everyone, and we'll close with the meditation.
Let me sit quietly and observe the time. We are watching a world in dramatic change. All the systems and institutions we have known for so long are also changing. What is time calling me to do? What do I need to do, seeing the world at large and even my own life and family and the people around me? Time is telling me to know and experience who I am, and to reconnect with the lover of the soul, Shiv Baba, a real living being. And when I develop a loving relationship with the Supreme, who is eternally soul conscious, I start to feel myself becoming soul conscious once again. I feel my self-respect returning. I feel my happiness returning. I feel my power coming back. We are in an age of transformation. And time is calling me to step into my own transformation and prepare myself for a new world. I don't have to change where I live. I don't have to change anything physically. I just need to change my thoughts, my feelings, and perception. I begin to see myself as the eternal soul. That in fact, I can never die. But I will leave this body. But before I leave this body, I want to step back into the person I know I can be. rather than living in the past, living with what has happened to me, all the stories and memories, I make a decision to let it go, to see God, see my true self, and see the future. And in doing this, having good wishes for everyone around me. Some may understand me. Many may not understand me. But that's okay. Each one is an actor in the drama of life, playing their part. And I choose to have love and respect for everyone. To move forward spiritually, I need to practice daily. To wake up, remember Baba, and during the day, practice soul consciousness and try to maintain my link. When I do, I create a beautiful life. Om Shanti.
Om Shanti, everyone. Rest well. And remember that next week we will back onto the Monday evening program with the Monday evening link. But we'll send you a reminder. We'll send you a reminder soon. To Om Shanti and good night, and a heartfelt thanks to Charlie for such an insight, which may have raised a lot of questions, and we're happy to be with you on those. Good night, everyone.
Good night, Jackie. Thank you. Good night, everyone. Bye.